Hey, what is up guys? It's Shannon from the Trinisphere, where Timmy, Johnny, and Spike battle over all things EDH. Today I'm going to talk to you about Dimir Superfriends. Before I dive into the list, be sure to like if you want to see more deep dive Johnny deck techs like this, and subscribe if you want to get notifications when the Timmy and the Spike come out with their deck techs, or the gameplay featuring these lists comes out soon. The 32 deck challenge. That's when somebody decides they want to build a EDH deck based on every single color combination, all 32. However, some people do some themed ones, and I'm undergoing the 32 Super Friends challenge. I'm going to build a Super Friends EDH deck based off every single color combination. And today I'm going to share with you my Dimir Super Friends list. Helmed by Rona, Disciple of Gix. I've dubbed this one Rona's Radical Recurring Super Friends. Rona, Disciple of Gix is a uncommon 3-mana 2/2 human artificer from Dominaria that says when Rona, Disciple of Gix enters the battlefield, you may exile target historic card from your graveyard. And then you may cast non-land cards exiled with Rona, and she also has a 4 generic and tap activated ability that says exile the top card of your library. Now, if you guys are like me when you first saw this card, you said this is a terrible commander, and probably couldn't think of any good decks or anything that she could do that another superior Reanimator commander could do, and just run circles around her. But as a deep dive Johnny, I finally found a use for Rona, Disciple of Gix, and that is to reanimate planeswalkers. If we think about her, she's effectively like a 3-mana Snapcaster mage. She may not have flash, but she does recur planeswalkers, artifacts, legendary creatures, and sagas out of our graveyard. If you think of her more like Snapcaster in a one-shot useful kind of way, then we can see that what she lacks in extended value generation, she can be extremely precise and useful in certain cases. After all, who wouldn't want to have Snapcaster Mage as their commander? So the way we're going to use Rona, Disciple of Gix to win is with a Dimir self-mill deck built around Jace, Wielder of Mysteries. Jace, Wielder of Mysteries is a 4-mana, 4 loyalty planeswalker that says if you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, you win the game instead. He has a +1 that says the target player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard, and then you draw a card. And he has a -8 that says draw 7 cards, then if your library has no cards in it, you win the game. So he's effectively like a planeswalker version of Laboratory Maniac. So what better win con for a deck that mills out itself entirely than a Laboratory Maniac that can be recurred by Rona, Disciple of Gix. So to support Jace, Wielder of Mysteries, and to mill out our entire library, we're going to be using Basalt Monolith and Mesmeric Orb. If you're not familiar with this combo, Basalt Monolith is a 3-mana artifact that does not untap during our untap step, but it can tap for 3 colorless mana, and we can spend 3 generic mana to untap Basalt Monolith. Meanwhile, Mesmeric Orb is a 2-mana artifact that says whenever a permanent becomes untapped, that permanent's controller puts the top card of their library into their graveyard. So these two cards working in conjunction, Basalt Monolith can generate the 3 mana and then use that 3 mana to untap itself, triggering Mesmeric Orb to mill us for 1 card. And we can just repeat this infinitely to instantly mill our entire library. Then all we need to do is cast our Rona, Disciple of Gix and pick up our Jace, Wielder of Mysteries out of our graveyard, then cast them from exile and roll them up to win the game. Now, one thing I should mention right here is that this is a 7-mana play. It'll require 2 generic mana, a single black, and 4 blue mana in order to pull off a Rona plus Jace play. So we have to keep that in mind whenever we're building up our board state, playing specific lands, and choosing which mana rocks that we want to run out, because we're always thinking in the back of our mind that we're going to need 4 blue open to pull off the win. Now, normally I would put in some redundant pieces of Basalt Monolith and Mesmeric Orb combos here, but there are not a whole lot of other good options, so instead, we're going to go a little spikier with our approach, and we're going to use Tutors. We're going to be running Demonic Tutor, Inventor's Fair, and Tezzeret the Seeker, and I really love Tezzeret the Seeker as an artifact planeswalker. He's a 5-mana planeswalker that starts at 4 loyalty. He has a +1 that untaps 2 artifacts, and he has a -X that allows us to search our library for an artifact with CMC X or less and put it in the battlefield. And then he has a -5 that says artifacts you control become artifact creatures with base power and toughness 5 until end of turn. But I really love his -X. You can tutor up things like Mox Opal, Mana Crypt. You can even tutor up lands like Darksteel Citadel without even really losing any loyalty doing it. He just becomes a tutor engine until our opponents can kill him. We're also going to run Tribute and Trophy Mages, the pair of which can each tutor one of our combo pieces. Tribute Mage can go get Mesmeric Orb, and Trophy Mage can go get Basalt Monolith. And then we're also going to round it out with a Vampiric Tutor. So you can see that we're jamming a lot of really expensive, spikier cards into this deck. You know, this deck list is not as Johnny as I normally go, because honestly, Super Friends decks are not very good in EDH. If your opponents manage to kill your planeswalkers, they end up being overpriced sorceries, effectively, when you cast them and they die. So we're going to jam a little bit more power into this list in order to make sure that we can pull off some wins. In addition to Rona recurring planeswalkers and artifacts out of our graveyard, we're also going to use some of the recursion spells, including Buried Ruin, Emery, Lurker of the Loch, Silas Wren, Seeker Adept, and Snapcaster Mage. Emery, Lurker of the Loch is an amazing card for this deck. She automatically mills you for 4. She costs 1 less for each artifact, so generally speaking, she just costs a blue. And then, of course, if she manages to survive a whole turn, she can just tap to put things like Mox Opal directly into play without costing you anything. She's a powerful engine that needs to be killed on sight, generally speaking. Snapcaster Mage is in here, may not be able to recur planeswalkers or artifacts. However, when we go to combo off and we have our entire library milled out into our graveyard, we want to have access to our counter spells to cover us. Because, of course, we go into a moment of weakness where if our opponents remove Jace, Wielder of Mysteries, we've just milled our entire library. We're dead. We're going to lose the game. So Snapcaster gives us a possible out in that situation, able to recast a counterspell out of our graveyard. But that, of course, assumes we have even more blue mana, so it's a tough call. Speaking of which, focusing on the costliness of the winning play in this deck, Rona dying and becoming taxed is a huge problem that we need to look out for. We do not want to have, instead of this becoming a 7 mana winning play, it become a 9 or 11 mana winning play. So we're going to be running a couple of bounce spells in this deck. Ways to, even if we have to cast Rona early game, we bounce her to our hand so that when we're ready to combo off, she just costs that 3. We're going to be running Crystal Shard, Jace the Mind Sculptor, and Jace Unraveler of Secrets. So we can use these cards defensively to bounce our opponent's creatures, but really they're in here to put Rona into our hand so that we don't have to pay any taxes. Like I mentioned before, we're going to have a couple counterspells to cover us in our moment of weakness, that final stretch to the finish line. We're going to be running Force of Negation, Force of Will, and Pact of Negation. A lot of power here, a lot of money, a lot of spikier cards that you're seeing in this list. And of course, Pact of Negation being the premier Snapcaster target when we're about to win the game and they're trying to stop us. You can just snap him in and cast that for 0. Don't worry about paying the upkeep. Either we win or we lose, and we're never going to have to pay that. So outside of the Basalt Monolith Mesmeric Orb combo, we can mill ourselves with a bunch of other planeswalkers, including Ashiok, Dreamrender, Jace, Memory Adept, Jace the Living Guild Pact, and Jace Vryn's Prodigy. The last one I really like is just as a Merfolk looter. He's kind of like an honorary Super Friends Merfolk looter. I really don't want to flip him, generally speaking, in games because his other abilities are just not that relevant to what we're trying to do in this deck. If we do flip him, he has the ability set +1 up to 1 target creature gets -2, -0 until our next turn. -3 may cast an instant or sorcery card from our graveyard this turn. If that card would be put in the graveyard this turn, exile instead. And then -9, we get an emblem with whenever you cast a spell, target opponent puts the top 5 cards of his or her library into their graveyard. The ult is okay, and the -3 can be useful, but we kind of have to use that in preparation for going off to kind of target our Force of Will or Pact of Negation out of our graveyard to cover our winning play. Generally speaking, he's just better as a Merfolk looter. We're also going to run Kasmina, Enigmatic Mentor, Oath of Jace, Riddlesmith, and Stitcher's Supplier, the always excellent 1-drop. So you can see a bunch of these cards can either put specific cards in our hand in our graveyard, or they generally speaking just mill for chunks. And we're also going to want to target ourselves here because we just want to fill up our graveyard with lots of juicy Rona targets. But mainly we're just digging to find Mesmeric Orb and Basalt Monolith. So going back to that 7-mana game-winning play, we're going to run a ton of ramp to support that and a lot of expensive rocks. You're going to be like, is this a Johnny list? You know, like I said, Super Friends is tough to win with. We go a little spikier when we're running Super Friends. So we're going to have Arcane Signet, Cabal Coffers, Dimir Signet, and Everflowing Chalice. The new Arcane Signet does do work here. And of course, Dimir Signet is very good because it can turn a generic or colorless mana into a blue pip or black pip if necessary. We're also going to run Mana Crypt, Mana Vault, Mind Stone, and Mox Amber. Always good because it works with both legendary creatures or planeswalkers to produce mana. And we're going to run Mox Opal, Mox Tantalite, Soul Ring, and Teferi Temporal Archmage. Now, Mox Tantalite is here is kind of just a meme. The card is absolutely terrible. I would never really want to run this, but I do run it in here just for the lulz, and also because Tezzeret the Seeker can tutor hit up for a -0. You know, his ability says, for -X, you may search your library for an artifact card with CMC X or less and put it onto the battlefield. Mox Tantalite CMC is 0, so he can go tutor up Mox Tantalite, and you can show people that the card can exist in a deck and not be terrible. Or maybe you can play it on turn 1, so by, you know, turn 4, you can have that extra mana for going off. Teferi Temporal Archmage needs no introduction. We're going to just running him in here for his -1 untapped for permanence. Generally, you're going to run him out before the turn you're going to go off. He's not exactly a Chain Veil combo in this deck, so we're going to run him out, and then hopefully he survives. We untap, and then now we have 4 or 5 or 6 extra mana to play with and try and combo off the following turn. We're also going to run Tezzeret Master of the Bridge and Ugin the Ineffable, both of which are great discounters of things in our deck. Tezzeret Master of the Bridge is awesome. That's 6 mana, 5 loyalty, buy a box promo, I believe, that says creatures and planeswalker spells you cast have affinity for artifacts. You guys remember affinity for artifacts? That was a busted ability, and it's back, and it's great in here. Very often he can make Ugin the Ineffable free to cast. He can negate Rona's tax if she dies and we have to use her early on. He can make all of our planeswalkers just come out so quickly. His other abilities include +2 to have him deal X damage to each opponent or X are the number of artifacts we control and gain X life. So there's a little bit of life loss mitigation there if we're taking a beating. His -3, super relevant. Return target artifact card from our graveyard to our hand. Of course, we're a self-milling deck, so we're going to be using him to pick up some of our combo pieces if need be. And he has a -8 that says exile the top 10 cards of our library and put all artifacts from among them onto the battlefield. Don't ever see that coming into play, but it's possible. We get in a weird state and we're able to ult him, and you know, you could just hit the combo right then and there hilariously. Ugin the Ineffable, 6 mana, 4 loyalty planeswalker that says colorless spells we cast cost 2 less to cast. So he makes all of these mana rocks that we're casting free. Very good with Emery and Rona, discounting them even when they're in our graveyard. He has a +1 that says exile the top card of our library face down and look at it. Create a 2/2 colorless spirit creature token, and when that token leaves the battlefield, put the exiled card in our hand. So it's effectively blockers plus draw power rolled into a single ability. And then he has a -3, destroy target permanent that's 1 or more colors, so we have spot removal. This guy really does it all. Usually when you raid a planeswalker, you say, can it defend itself? Can it generate card advantage? And does it have an ult that can win the game? This guy checks off in one ability, defending himself and generating card advantage, so a very good planeswalker for sure. We're going to go into a removal, including Cyclonic Rift, Damnation, Karn Liberated, and Mana Drain. Before we talked about this counter spells we're going to use to protect our combo, I do not classify Mana Drain as a protection spell due to the fact that it costs mana. I like to be able to tap out for our combo and then have those free to cast counter spells backing us up. However, Mana Drain is really useful at setting up that combo. Kind of like how I talked about Teferi and tapping 4 things next turn. Mana Drain is really great at assembling the combo in the following turn. You just try and get a chunky 6 mana spell or something with your Mana Drain, and now you can cast Mesmeric Orb and that Basalt Monolith effectively for free. Or maybe you can pay down Rona's tax for that final push. We're also going to run Oath of Liliana, Obnixilis Reignited, Pendril Mists, and Phyrexian Scriptures, the last of which is the first saga that I've mentioned. Of course, sagas can be recurred by Rona's Disciple of Gix. And Phyrexian Scriptures' second ability is to destroy all non-artifact creatures, so this is kind of a recursive board wipe that we can assemble. Pendulum Mist is a new card that I've been trying out in my Super Friends lists. Generally speaking with Super Friends, you end up facing down a lot of 3v1 situations, so you just want to make an environment that's very hostile to creatures. You just want to make sure creatures are constantly getting removed from the board, and your opponents are having trouble pressuring your planeswalkers while you're generating value. We're also going to run Tezzeret the Schemer, the Eldest Reborn, and Toxic Deluge. The Eldest Reborn is a pretty weak saga. I generally do like to run it because it's got Nicol Bolas on it mainly, but it has extra value in this deck because we're going to have a ton of good targets with his final chapter. But of course, let's talk about the first 2 chapters. Chapter 1, each opponent sacrifices a creature or a planeswalker. Chapter 2, each opponent discards a card. And then the final chapter, the good one, says put target creature or planeswalker card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. So this deck was originally kind of more of a proliferate-centric approach, but then I realized I probably would prefer my Simic build to be all proliferate centric, considering you have access to both Evolution Sage and Flux Channeler. But if you are running proliferate with these sagas, you can accelerate their timeline by increasing the number of lore counters on them. By proliferating the lore counters, as soon as they get proliferated, they trigger their next chapter. So you can kind of skip ahead and fly through this very quickly by proliferating Eldest Reborn. All right, for draw power, we're going to run our Artificer's Assistant, Baleful Strix, Jace Beleren, and Karn Scion of Urza. Artificer's Assistant, not actually technically draw power, but it is a sort of card advantage scrying. And coming down early as a 1 mana 1/1 creature, this card can really set the pace for our game. Because Artificer's Assistant says whenever we cast a historic spell, scry 1. And of course, we're going to be dropping a lot of 0 mana, 1 mana artifacts and planeswalkers. We're going to trigger this little bird several times a turn and help us filter and dig for our combo piece. We're also going to run Narset, Parter of Veils, Tezzeret, Agent of Bolas, Tezzeret, Artifice Master, and the Antiquities War. The Antiquities War is an interesting saga. 4 mana, it says both chapters 1 and 2 say look at the top 5 cards of our library and we may reveal an artifact from among them and put them into our hand, put the rest in the bottom of our library in a random order. And then its final chapter says artifacts we control become artifact creatures with base power toughness 5 until end of turn. It reveals 10 cards every time we manage to resolve it. So I do, normally for critical mass cards like this, I'm going to want to have more artifacts than are in this deck, but being able to recur this with Rona over and over again gives this extra digging power to find our combo pieces. So I do like this saga a lot. All right, from our draw, let's talk about our utility cards. Some that didn't fit into the other categories. They may be leftovers from previous builds. In here, we got our Deep Glow Skate. Of course, you can't have a blue Super Friends deck without this sweet 5 mana 3/3 fish that when it enters the battlefield, it doubles the number of each kind of counter on in any number of target permanents. Basically, powering up Super Friends to the point where they can fire off their ults. We're also going to run Expedition Map, going to be able to help us find our Cabal coffers for that extra mana push, or it's going to be able to help us find our Inventor's Fair so we can use that to go tutor up our combo pieces. We're going to run Flux Channeler, one of the only proliferates left from a previous proliferate build. Really good card for generally just increasing the health of our planeswalkers. Triggers off of non-creature spells such as all of our mana rocks, so we can keep our planeswalkers very healthy even when they're getting hit by our opponents. We're going to run Hangerback Walker, which can also feed off of that Flux Channeler, but generally just speaking, just makes a really good blocker that we can recur over and over again with Rona and Emery and Silas and Tezzeret. And then to round out our list, we have Trinket Mage. While he cannot tutor up one of our combo pieces, he certainly can tutor up a ton of really good mana rocks. After our utility, we've got to talk about our Spice. Once again, I'll reiterate that Super Friends decks are generally weak in EDH and generally not very powerful, so we're going to run a little bit of extra spiky hate in this list in the form of Karn, the Great Creator, and Mycosynth Lattice. If you're not familiar with this combo, Karn, the Great Creator, is a 4-mana, 5 loyalty planeswalker that says activated abilities of artifacts your opponent's control can't be activated. He also has a +1 that says until your next turn, up to one target non-creature artifact becomes an artifact creature with power and toughness equal to its CMC, and he has a -2 that says you may choose an artifact card you own from outside the game or in exile, reveal that card and put it into your hand. And Mycosynth Lattice is a 6-mana artifact that says all permanents are artifacts in addition to their other types. It also says some other stuff, but what we really want to talk about here is that we're going to turn all of our opponent's lands into artifacts, and then Karn the Great Creator says activated abilities of artifacts our opponent's control can't be activated. It doesn't even say non-mana activated abilities. That means when their lands become artifacts, they can no longer tap their lands for mana. It just locks them out of the game. Whatever they have in play is what they got to work with. So if you have control of the board state at that point, it just instantly locks everyone out of the game, and you can win from there. I should mention that Karn the Great Creator has an added benefit. There is a reason that I'm running this combo in that he can fetch artifact cards from exile, which means if we get got while Rona has exiled one of our combo pieces, or maybe our opponents decide that, hey, I know what you're up to, and they slam down an exile target artifact spell while we're trying to combo off, Karn the Great Creator gives us the ability to go get our Basalt Monolith or Mesmeric Orb from exile and put it back in our hands so that we have a little extra recovery. All right, finally, I'll talk about a few of the lands. I wanted to mention a few of them. I'm not going to go over the entire mana base because generally it's subjected to what you can afford. You know, once you've built a lot of decks and spent a lot of money on EDH, all your mana bases kind of start to look the same. So I really only call out the cards that do stand out. We are going to be running the artifact lands, including Darksteel Citadel, Seat of the Synod, and Vault of Whispers. I love running these, especially with Trinket Mage. Turns them into a sort of Borderland Ranger, able to go fetch up any lands for us. And it also allows Tezzeret the Seeker's -0, turns it into kind of a rampant growth. We're able to go get Seat of the Synod, Seat of the Synod being the important one because we need that quad blue to combo off. Or Darksteel Citadel if we're a little paranoid we're going to get blown out by some artifact destruction. We're also going to run Dark Water Catacombs and Sunken Ruins. Now I'm calling these out because these two cards are very important for filtering our mana into that triple blue scenario. Darkwater Catacombs is a signet land, which means it takes a generic mana of any color and turns it into Dimir, which is important because we have a ton of colorless mana production in this deck, so this filters it into colors that we need to combo off with. And of course, Sunken Ruins, the same kind of thing. It takes a blue or a black and turns it into double blue or Dimir or double black. We can this basically converts one of our swamps into an island when we're ready to use that quad blue combo off. All right, guys, that's a wrap on this list. What do you think? Is Dimir Superfriends viable? Is Rona Disciple of the Gix a viable commander? Did I miss any cards that come to mind? Be sure to let me know and comment below. Like if you enjoyed this Johnny Dimir self-milling Rona's radical recurring Super Friends list. Be sure to subscribe if you want to get notifications when the Timmy list and the Spike list come out and when the gameplay featuring this deck list comes out soon. Also below, I'll add the link to TCG Player, and if you follow that link and decide to buy any cards, we'll get a percentage of TCG Player's cut, which goes a long way to help me on my Super Friends challenge, Juan afford another budget EDH deck, and it'll help Hogg buy some of these rocks off of me. Alright, this is Shannon the Johnny signing off. As always, great minds brew alike.